Welcome back in, everybody, to a Wednesday edition of Bird 365. Here, joined by Mike Gill now from 97.3 ESPN. Follow him on Twitter at Mike Gill Show. Mike, welcome to the show, man. How you doing on this Wednesday morning?
Good morning, everybody. We're up and at it, ready to go. Week 6 is already here. Can you believe it?
Week 6. Before we get there, we gotta let's put a bow, Mike, on Devin White, because you have a lot of guys in the Tampa area. You go down to Clearwater all the time, and hopefully everybody's okay down there. We say again as Hurricane Milton bears down on Florida, but not good. And you had this perception that you were getting some kind of star player. I never got it, Mike. Now you got to deal with callers, texters every day. Why do you think it is? Why do you think the perception with this particular player never matched the reality? Is it just being the number 5 overall pick forever?
Yeah, I mean, you're the number 5 pick, and then you start to gain some accolades with that. You know, he was an all-pro player, second-team all-pro in 2020.
Boy, that's a bad job, Mike. That's a bad job.
Right. Well, for whatever it is, he was when you get that guy who's a Pro Bowler. We all know a Pro Bowler doesn't mean anything. Yeah. But when you say that, it gives people some ammunition to be like, he was one of the elites. Now, you know, you look at the game today, like Tyler Huntley made the Pro Bowl because he was like the 9th alternate because they just ran out of quarterbacks. That doesn't make Huntley any good. But he was a Pro Bowl player in 2021, and that followed up his 2020 season in which he was an All-Pro. And to be fair to Devin, he did play very well to help that team win a Super Bowl.
He did, which was weird. He
had
was
a
tremendous in the
he
run.
Had a run during that Super Bowl season where, and from the people I don't watch his all 22 and his game tape all the time, but for the people I talk to down there, and multiple people, former players, people who cover the team, people who work for that team, have said he just didn't have it anymore. He freelanced so much. He just basically, didn't listen all that much. He kind of did what he wanted to do. He's one of these guys, I think, he's a 5th overall pick as a linebacker. Think about that. What linebacker is getting taken 5th in the draft? That he was such a good, athlete at the college level and at the professional level that he was able to just get by on that. Well, it starts to catch up with you at this level. You can't just freelance and do what you want to do. And I think it just basically turned into a player who just didn't know what to do unless he was just freelancing. And the Eagles and Tampa Bay last year, go back and look at their inactive list. He wasn't hurt. He wasn't hurt in week 15 when he wasn't playing for them. So when you ask the question, what happened to this guy? Why did Tampa let an all-pro Pro Bowl player walk out the door and didn't have any problem doing so? And now you ask the question, the Eagles signed this guy. What are they doing? They had an all-pro linebacker. They saw what Tampa saw and said, hey, we'll take a shot with this guy, what we see what Tampa's saying. And now he's gone.
Mike, I want you to tell me if I'm overreacting. Howie Roseman has had a lot of misses this offseason in terms of the defensive side of the ball. Bryce Huff, I'm looking at 2 first-round draft picks, Jordan Davis and Nolan Smith, who are pretty underwhelming at best. Nakobe Dean is a meh type of player, not a difference maker at all. C.J. Gardner-Johnson's right now bottom of the league in terms of missed tackles and touchdowns given up in coverage. We got the greatest offense we've maybe ever had in franchise history in terms of talent, and we might squander it with a putrid defense. And when I think of the Devin White news, John's prepared me for the Devin White news, that he's not the player everybody thinks he is. But now I'm looking at all the darts that were thrown on the defensive side of the ball, and I'm like, there's too many misses this year. This team's not going to succeed with this defense. Overreaction or not?
No, it's a fair. I don't know if it's an overreaction. I think it's a fair reaction. You're not overreacting. I look at Jordan Davis, and you're disappointed. In year 3, you're disappointed by him. It's not changing. This is who he is. He's not an impact player. Is he a decent player? Okay, fine. If you want to be nice, he's a decent player. He's not an impact player for where you drafted him. I'm not asking him to be Vita Vea, but you drafted a guy at that spot in the draft to do something special. He doesn't stop the run special. He's not a consistent anything. There's nothing consistent about his game. Is he a decent player? I'll be nice. Huff has been a bustaroni of epic proportions, and I don't know what you do to fix that. Is that he can't play, or is he in the wrong scheme? Whatever it is, he's not been a good fit here at all. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, he hasn't played great. I'll give you that. I like the signing because you had a guy that gave you turnover potential. He was a guy who can get interceptions. He was a playmaker, something this defense lacked. It hasn't worked out through 4 games. Jury's out there. The linebacking situation is an organizational philosophy that they just don't give a rat's ass about. And these 2 guys in there are doing what they can do. They're okay. They're not awful. They're not killing. It's not like Nate Geary. That guy was awful playing linebacker. These guys are competent, but nothing spectacular. Obviously, Nolan Smith has been a major disappointment. You draft that guy in the first round, and he can't even hand the quarterback a handkerchief. I mean, he can't get near him. He can't get near him. So, yeah, they've had a lot of issues on that side of the ball with, quite frankly, guys we're talking about that, Jordan Davis, Nolan Smith. So far, Cooper DeJean hasn't helped you, and that's injury. He couldn't get on the field. Mitchell's been a pretty good player. I mean, you got to give it to that. So, yeah, they've got some high picks that have missed. And, quite frankly, the Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, I think the jury's still out on that one. But you're not overreacting. The defense is not good enough. And coupled with, there's nobody that you feel like they're underperforming. And maybe Huff. If Huff, but I don't know. My opinion was, even if he's as good as he can be, he ain't Hassan Reddick good. And if he's not on that level, this defense is lesser than it already was. So you brought in a lesser player than you had on a defense that already wasn't good.
Yeah, and you got Vic Fangio. Scheme it up, Vic. Scheme it up.
I think that might have been the thought was, hey, we'll swap out because Huff is younger. We can't justify the money to Reddick. So can you come to terms with that? We couldn't pay Reddick because of the age. Okay, we all kind of can understand. I don't think there's a lot of people out there barking to pay Reddick, right?
No,
I think right now they're looking back like shit.
I mean, yeah, not that.
Yeah, but at the time, even if you say, why would we just pay the guy? I don't think anybody was fighting to pay him. So they tried to replace him with a younger guy. And I said at the time, I said, look, even if he's as good as he can be, he's not better than Reddick was. And now you have a lesser player. Even at his best, he's a lesser player. How do you think this defense now? They tried to go get Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. They drafted 2 corners. Okay, let's see it come together. Look, we're in week 4 for them. They've played 4 games. We're in week 6. They had a bye, but there's some growing to do. I think the problem a lot of people are coming to terms with is the ceiling of the growth doesn't feel all that high with this bunch.
Yeah, and I think, to the point about the edge rushers, it's one thing for Bryce Huff to not be Hassan Reddick. I never expect him to be Hassan Reddick. But do you expect the combination of Huff and the first round draft pick you spent on an edge rusher 2 years ago to make up for some of that? I did. And now they both been a nothing burger. And that is accentuating the problem in a big way.
I think they did too. I think you figure we got 2 guys that can replace one. And maybe they had higher hopes for Huff. I mean, they gave him some decent amount of money. I mean,
they definitely
it's not like they tried to, it wasn't one of these Howie deals where he tries to sneak a guy in, low cost, high reward. I mean, they've done that with like the Patrick Robinsons, Devin White. He's tried this before where he finds these high first round talents, pays them on the 1-year deal and tries to sneak something out of them. And it's worked for them in the past. This year, it's not working.
Yeah, I feel like they do it a lot, though, and it usually doesn't work. And I think people go, well, Chris Long and the Super Bowl season, as you mentioned, where it seemed like everything worked. And that's why they went to the Super Bowl and won the Super Bowl, because everything worked. But typically when you make a dart throw, you don't hit the bullseye. And that happens more often than not, because they've done it a ton over the past 2 years. Just bringing in these reclamation projects. And I don't know, maybe it's time to stop that. Now, I don't. Saquon's not a reclamation project, but if you think about think about last year with Terrell Edmonds. Oh, he's a first round pick. He played 5 years for the Steelers. They do this all the time.
Yeah, this is a blueprint for them. High risk or low risk, high reward opportunities. We're not going to pay you much. You had talent. Somebody, gave up on you. We'll take a shot. And if it works, great. If it doesn't, we'll move on. And it's a low compensation for a lot of these guys. On the defensive side of the ball, though, I don't know where you go in season right now. It happens very rarely. I guess trades in the NFL happen more now than they used to.
A little bit more, but still it's rare.
Rare.
Especially talking about you need an impact player. It's just not going to happen.
You saw Chase Young get traded last year. People, oh my God, San Francisco, that defense added Chase Young. He didn't do anything to help that team. In fact, he's now on a different team because they said, all right, we're ready to move on.
Yeah.
Montez Sweat, decent player with Chicago. Okay, can you find some of that? Here's one of the problems. You got 10 teams in the NFC right now that are either 500 or better, and I say 10 because San Francisco's 2 and 3. I think we kind of believe in them. They would be the 10th team. 9 teams are 500 or better. So almost every team in the NFC right now kind of thinks that they're a player. They kind of think they're in this thing. The AFC is a disaster. So which teams are you calling? All right, you're probably hoping Cincinnati loses a couple more games. Maybe they start to, hey, here's Hendrickson. We'll try to find some guys. That's the only opportunity you can get is a team like last year, Washington, who just kind of said, all right, we're spinning our wheels and changing the whole organization around. But you talk about throwing a dart. That's what you're really waiting for. You're really waiting for someone else's season to fall apart. And if that doesn't happen, this is what you got. And I'm telling you, in week 5 for me, I just don't see where all of a sudden they generate pass rush. And if you don't, you're going into every week relying on that offense to score 35 points. And that's a lot to ask.
Yeah, it is. And we'll see how it shakes out. I mean, I do think I'm not quite as willing to shut the door on the upside of certain people. And hopefully, Nolan Smith is still a very young player. And I feel like everybody slammed the door on that guy. And maybe they should, but I think it's
with Nolan Smith, John, the one issue that I have, and probably many, is you just see him on the field and he just looks like he doesn't belong. And he's just so small.
He looks more like a linebacker. He doesn't look like a dominant edge rusher.
He looks like a corner at times. I mean, you're like, what is this guy doing?
Well, that's the modern NFL. You get those types of players. Like some of these linebackers teams roll out there.
He's really small, though. Man, he's really small.
I
feel like he gets no leverage, and these tackles are literally just riding him and then pushing him, and he gets no leverage.
That's the problem. And then, you get the Bijan Robinson chip block where he knocked him to another universe, and that's not a good look.
You watch him on these all-22s, he looks lost. He looks like he's trying to just run circles around these tackles, and these tackles are like, what are you doing, dude? And they're pushing him with like one hand.
There's a lot of good tackles in the NFL.
Yeah. Well, John, where I'll agree with you is I do think he should be given a little more time. My problem with that is, I mean, look, you're talking to a town that had Brandon Graham. He didn't come alive until what, year 4, year 5, and he's now been one of the greatest Eagles to ever play in our uniform.
200 games this week.
I get it, but here's the problem. Super Bowl windows aren't open that long. And right now, our offense.
You could argue it's already closed with that.
Right. So
I
it's
don't know
like,
what to think of this team.
We get this offense that we spent all this money on. They're, like I said, arguably the greatest collection of talent on the offensive side of the ball that's ever resided in the city of Philadelphia. And we got a bunch of dudes on defense who are underperforming. This is where I'm like starting to look at Howie. I'm like, dude, you squandered this opportunity by being stingy on the defensive side, or he just can't.
Well, you can't
evaluate guys.
You can't have everything. Obviously, I've said this from the start. Clearly, what this team said is, all right, we're going to get really good on offense, and Vic will figure it out on defense. That was the plan. That remains the plan.
Vic Fangio, Mike said, defensive coordinator to magician.
Mike said, they got to score 35 points a game. All right, go score 35 points a game. You hear what Zander's saying. They have the greatest collection of talent in the history of Philadelphia. Go
Yeah.
score 35
And
points.
listen, we have seen, and this happened there, like Dallas last week. You lose Parsons and Lawrence, and they had their best defensive effort of the season. There are weeks where you're going. They played well against the Saints. I mean, they had a
Played
good game
really
against
well.
the Saints. So there are going to be weeks where they do play well, and the offense is going to perform, and you're going to have that game because the offense should be good enough that they, we talked about this before. This should be a team that scores. I think I said about 29 points a game was about the average you're hoping for, and they can get around there. And there's gonna be some weeks where the defense just has a really good game plan, and it does work. And you're like, where's this defense been? You know those games are coming. They're in there somewhere. They had them last year. Last year against Miami, the defense played excellent against a really good offense.
Ago, Mike. They had it 2 weeks ago versus the Saints.
Against the Saints. The problem is, in this league, to be a really good defense, you have to be consistent, and they don't have enough consistency. So yes, they could do it for 1 week, and you're like, where's this been? But they don't have consistent enough talent. Zach Bond in week 1, you're talking about an all-pro performance. He had 3 sacks. He's all over the place. And then, the next week he gets schemed up. Well, they were chop blocking him. Well, the next week, you didn't see him chop blocking him. We worked on that all week. Well, the consistency is you got to do it every week. And that's why they're not a very good defense. They don't have consistent enough talent right now on that side of the ball. And part of it is, look, you got a lot of young players trying to find their way. You got a lot of new guys trying to figure out the new system. Does that mean in week 14 they're going to be much better than they are in week 4? You damn hope so, right?
Yeah. No, and we'll see. I mean, a lot of the early issues have to deal with injuries, and we know they're not the same team without Lane Johnson, particularly on the field, without AJ Brown, particularly on the field. And this past game against Tampa Bay before the bye, you had Devontae Smith. So a lot of the offensive struggles, I think, are self-correcting. Defensively, Vic's got to figure some stuff out. And I think that is part of the problem as well. Boy, you and I talk about coaching all the time. I think Vance put way too much emphasis on coaching. These guys were supposed to be a lot better than the old guys. Everything looks similar to the point that everybody says, Mike, everybody says when things go bad, that's Sirianni. When things don't go bad, hey, Kellen Moore's getting to do what he wants. And with Vic, he's got a little bit more cachet. So give him a rope. Technically, if you want to go back to last year, early in the season, Sean Desai was doing better than Vic Fangio till the wheels came up.
This is the same story in all Philadelphia sports. It's always the coach, and it's always personality over performance, right? Always. We talked about it, I think, last time. They love Buddy Ryan. Andy Reid sucked. Why? Well, Buddy Ryan said he would punch Jimmy Johnson in the face, and Andy Reid was not a very personality-driven guy. Andy Reid runs circles around Buddy Ryan as a coach. But that's why just to go to your comment about Vic, people like the crustiness and tell it like it is of Fangio. So far, his defense has not been very impressive. The adjustments aren't there, the things that they're doing. Now, do we trust that Vic is going to make those changes? You're right. He's not getting – now, there are certain people I think that just don't like – they didn't like Gannon's defense, although Gannon is – would you take Gannon back?
Yeah.
I don't think they would.
Yeah, please.
I don't think most of them would.
Well,
some.
And John, you and I are the same. I don't like this style of defense, but this is today's game. A lot of people kind of took this Fangio defense and kind of ran with it across the league. But we've asked the question now, have the offenses kind of caught up to that style and started to say, you're going to play this Fangio style of defense. Now we're going to do this. And everything is against the Eagles where they have trouble this is the crazy part about that defense. You're relying on people to do something you can't practice. Tackle. You can't tackle, and your defense is predicated on being able to tackle. And you say, well, all defense has to tackle. This defense is predicated on letting you catch the ball in front of you and come up and make a tackle. You're asking guys who never tackle to tackle, and that's the basis of your defense in today's game. It doesn't – you're hoping that 4 guys up front get pressure, and they don't really have 4 guys that are capable of doing that on this roster. So this defensive scheme seems to be flawed with this talent.
This scheme is so overrated, Mike. It's never won in the league. Vic Fangio is like, the dude is all this pedigree. He's never won, Mike. And look at the Chiefs. I mean, and this is where I think we're hamstrung a little bit.
Well, a lot of times, to be fair, he didn't win because his offenses that he's been a part. Chicago hasn't had a quarterback in our lifetime.
Fair. That's fair. But I mean,
Denver Broncos.
Here's where I think the Eagles are a little bit more hamstrung. I mean, look at what the Chiefs have done in the last couple of years. I think there's a stat that somebody just put in here, and I'd have to double check on the validity of the stat. But the Chiefs haven't allowed 28 points in 26 games. They've completely changed their philosophy with Steve Spagnuolo and have loaded up on the defensive side of the ball. They're shooing off it. They're getting rid of offensive talent left and right. And they're now loading up the defense. It almost feels like there's a switch happening in the NFL, and the Eagles are way behind the 8 ball because their defense is nowhere near a Super Bowl caliber. Not even in the ballpark of a Super Bowl caliber defense. And I wonder if, that's the problem with our elite quarterback or our elite quarterback that's paid like an elite quarterback. Mahomes, you can shed talent and you're still going to win. You're still going to make hay. We shed talent here. We've already seen what Jalen is without these superstars on offense. I mean, we have about $200 million on offense. How good can our defense really be?
Yeah. I mean, and that's, you just watch the league and some of these primetime games, and they're just, Atlanta, good team, not a great team. Tampa, good team, not a great team. New Orleans, good team, not a great team. And there's fluidity in what they do offensively, just quick here, bang, 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 and let their guys do stuff. You just mentioned Kansas City doesn't have Juju Smith-Schuster. How old is he? 50? And he's open all the time. Bang, here, catch it and go.
Elevate.
The predication, they predicated on what the Eagles try to do. Nobody can tackle you. So just get the ball to the guy 5 yards and let someone try to tackle you. You have 2 unbelievable playmakers, and yet you're only seemingly trying to get them the ball in one manner down the field. And I get it, the big play. It's like Al Davis took over this organization and said, you just got to chuck the ball down the field.
Is that the quarterback or the organization?
That's a good question, because the quarterback, to me, is not that player. He's not that guy. He should be 1, 2, 3, bang. Like these teams, all 1, 2, 3, or shotgun, here you go, bang. AJ Brown, make a guy miss, make another guy miss, 8 yards. Bang. That's what all these teams are doing to you, and you're not doing it. Now, you're shorthanded, and you're not doing it. I mean, what are you doing? That's what's been perplexing so far through 4 weeks. The whole premise, we talked about it on my show, John, with you. You're down 2 receivers. You run 9 plays, 7 of them are passing plays on the first drive. What are you doing? And then you look at the scoreboard. Well, we ran 6 plays. We're down 21-0. We couldn't run the ball. Well, no crap, because when you had the ball, you threw it every single time to I can't even think of the guy's name. Who's playing wide receiver for this team?
Johan Dotson. He scored touchdowns at Kansas City like
John Ross. Yeah, it's a great.
Yeah, you're throwing to Paris Campbell and wondering why you went 3 and
Johnny
out.
Wilson. Don't forget Johnny.
So Johan Dotson. What about the 3rd round pick we sent for Johan Dotson? Is that on Howie or is that on the quarterback, Mike?
That's
in a lot of these things, the hindsight is easy. The fans thought that was a great idea.
Wow, they loved it. How are you gonna cover these 3 guys?
I tell you what, I got, not to toot my own horn, but I was not a fan of that trade, and I went back and watched the video on JAKIB of me criticizing it, and I got ripped in the comments.
Welcome, you got to have convictions in your arguments, and that's a good one if you didn't like it. I think most people said, man, you got a 1st round. And by the way, it's that you're dealing with a Washington franchise who had been so down rotten, and you're thinking, man, what are these idiots? And look, he has not made any impact. In fact, it's funny that we talk about this Dotson thing, because now I'm seeing people, these GMs who are trying to find trades for the deadline, and they're saying, well, the Eagles should make a trade for Amari Cooper. Now you're already looking for another wide receiver on this team.
Those people should be put away.
John, I saw the Bleacher Report on Devontae Adams. I immediately thought of you. I'm I know, John.
Yeah, these aggregators need to
Oh
be
man.
stopped from society.
It's like remember, I guess this was in the mid '90s when Detroit drafted wide receivers like 3 straight years. It was like, wow, look at this receiving core they have. It's like Charles Rogers and can't even remember.
Well, yeah. You're if you're trying to fix it, teams will do that. They'll sort of carpet bomb a particular position. That's fine if you do it in the draft. The Eagles did it for a while to like fix wide receiver, but yeah, these Devontae Adams is a fit for the Eagles stories. I mean, I don't, you know, I'm not a supporter of corporal punishment, but these people should be punished. I mean, and they create just a whole cottage industry of uneducated people. It's just so frustrating. But I digress. 2021, Mike Gill, coaching class. There's 2 left. And probably the 2 that get made fun of the most. Also the 2 most successful. Dan Campbell in Detroit, Nick Sirianni in Philadelphia. Everybody else is gone. Robert
Both, by the
Saleh,
way,
the latest.
both, by the way, are CEO coaches, and nobody asks what Dan Campbell does, do they?
No, they're busy toilet paper in his house or whatever.
But hey, there you go. Personality over performance. They like Dan Campbell's personality.
Well, I don't know. I didn't like it in the NFC Championship game. They didn't.
Yeah, but I think he's generally favorable. I think his Q rating is generally pretty favorable.
Well, yeah, he's on Applebee's.
He's in the Applebee's commercials. People like Dan Campbell because he has this personality. And that.
Well, he did have to move, Mike. He did have to move in Detroit because the people found out where he lived.
Jeez.
Mike, you didn't see that story? Yeah, they started going at his house and everything with tools, all sorts of crap. Because of that. I think, what was that, John? Because of the NFC title game?
Yeah.
Well, and what does he do? He makes the decisions on when to go, when not to go, similar to what Nick Sirianni does. But it's funny. I meant to ask you this yesterday. We were kind of tied up with the baseball and everything, but with Saleh getting fired, the heat gets cranked up to the next guy. Who's the next guy?
Yeah, I just don't think Jeffrey Lurie's that guy. He did it once, but it was at the end of the Chip Kelly era, and it was for 1 game.
Yeah,
but I do not think
he survived the bye week. Much, like what's happened with the Jets. It's like, hey, we're in London. If we're going to do it because we don't think this is getting better, now's the time. I think Sirianni has made it. I don't think that.
Yeah, he's not getting fired during the season.
What if they're 4-10?
All right, let me ask you this, because I wondered this when this news broke yesterday on Robert Saleh. I know it's not the Eagles' way, but you're talking about, and John, you talk about expectations all the time. Well, expectations matter, and it's hard for me to believe that the owner of this team, Jeffrey Lurie, didn't have bigger expectations.
Oh,
someone just broke the dam open in New York, though. You no longer have to be the first guy to make a switch because you're trying to reach expectations in a window. If Nick Sirianni comes out and this team loses to the worst offense in the league right now in the Browns and they're the only team that hasn't had a 300-yard game, they're putrid. If they lose to this team, the Browns, you guys take no shot at Nick Sirianni getting fired?
Mike?
I tend to think no shot, but I think your point is valid, Zander, is at what point does the owner say the expectations were this and we're not getting there and we don't seem to be pacing towards getting there? Can it be salvaged? They did make a coordinator change in season last year, and I know that's not the same, but that was at a pretty drastic time when you're 10-2.
Actually, it wasn't a drastic time. It was the opposite. You were 10-1.
Well, that's the thing. You could have argued it was too late.
But that's what I'm saying. You're 10-1, and you make the decision at that point to just change the coordinator. You don't think that's drastic?
He would no. I meant it by you shouldn't have made the change because they were, and he was thinking about it.
Well, that's what I'm saying is drastic about it. Like you just decide to change your coordinator at that stage, like.
Well, the whole that's a story. That's a story deserving of a book in its own right. But that the fact that that's one of the things that we don't have. Like, there's no way Sean Desai should have got fired. There's no way from an objective standpoint he should have got fired.
But what I would ask you, John, is were they, Buffalo made a offensive coordinator change a few weeks before, and it kind of sparked them. So to the point
It
that
didn't
you look
spark
at
them.
what's that?
It didn't spark them. It
Well,
didn't spark the Eagles.
No, that's my point is. Buffalo changed coordinators, and it sparked them. New York fires their coach. Does Philadelphia say, hey, they got rid of their guy? Now that gives us the ability, if we want to. We don't want to be the first. We don't want to be the one. But somebody else did it. Maybe now it's something.
Well, there's always
opens
something like, to Zander's point. No, Jeffrey Lurie's not going to fire his coach in season. Now, I say that, and if Nick Sirianni turns into, which I don't see happening, but I mean, there's always things you don't see. Like if he becomes so unhappy that he just wants out the door, maybe that changes the conversation. I don't think that's going to happen. In the case of Sean Desai, clearly, guys, they felt he didn't have the personality to command a room, to lead men. I hate that conversation, by the way, that phrase, leader of men. They just didn't feel like people were listening to him. He didn't have the gravitas to be in that position. So it's sort of like an intangible thing, but there's always something. Like, when you're 8-1, you don't think about firing the defensive coordinator. That's when it first popped into Nick Sirianni's head. Even if you're playing poorly on that side of the ball, they had some good games, they had some bad games. You don't do it. But they felt long-term, look, we didn't hire the right guy. They went in a different direction. And it, by the way, it was a disaster, rightly or wrongly. In the case of Nick Sirianni, I don't think that's going to happen, but that's the only way he's getting fired. Now, if he loses the next 4 games, all right, then you can open up the conversation, but that's not going to happen.
Yeah, here's my only pushback, and this is why Nick Sirianni's on the watch for me, because if Jeffrey Lurie's even thinking about this, if he's not thinking about it, you're right, John, he's not going to fire him until after the year. If it's even crossed his mind right now about Nick, wouldn't he make the move early to try and salvage the season in terms of waiting? If you lose the next 4, you're going to be effectively eliminated.
He's not going to lose the next 4. I get
it. If you promote somebody now at 2-3 with the NFC wide open, Jeffrey Lurie could justify in his mind, we got this great roster. We might be able to turn this thing around. Versus if you wait too long on Nick and then you make the move in week 10 or week 12, shit, it's a lost cause at that point.
He's not doing that. That's
what I said. If
he's
not thinking about it, you're right. He probably won't.
This is not the New York Jets. There's shitty organizations. There's
the Jets have as many Super Bowls as we do. So
yeah, but that's not the point. Right now they're a shitty organization, and they have been a shitty organization for years. It's like Washington. That's why people thought they fleeced Johan Dotson, not realizing it's not the same organization. Now you have a smart guy at GM. Now you have an owner that's at least going to be competent, although some Sixers fans might disagree, but he's not a disaster like Daniel Snyder. They're different. The Eagles are different. Whether you don't think they've won enough Super Bowls, they're a good organization. They're a steady organization for the most part. And I criticize Jeffrey Lurie all the time for his scapegoating when expectations aren't reached. Not perfect, but he's not the guy who's going to make rash decisions in week 4 when you don't have AJ freaking Brown for 3 of those 4 games. He's not that guy, and you don't want that guy.
I'm not saying I do, but John, you do have to wonder. I mean, look at this offense, man. AJ got paid. Devontae got paid.
By the way, that's the second part. Who's the head coach?
Nick.
No, who's the head coach if you fire Nick?
Oh, Kellen. I would do Kellen.
This guy can't put together a script to get a first down. They've had 13 plays to start games for 12 yards. And people think this guy is the next great head coach.
Real quick, you were saying, Zander, look at this offense. I think they are saying, look, we just played 3 games without AJ Brown. We are going to struggle. We played another game without Lane and Smith and Brown all at the same time. I think if you told me that at training camp, that would be a problem. So I don't know that they're evaluating their offense fully at this point to make rash decisions. They might be disappointed, but they also have to be realistic to say, look, we're 2-2. We just played a game without Smith, Brown, Johnson. We kind of like where we are now.
That's
4
why I
weeks
think
from
the thing
now,
is big though, Mike. Everybody comes back. If they stink versus the
right,
lowly
4
Browns,
weeks from now, if you're looking at this team and saying we're 2-6, this conversation is probably going to come back up.
Yeah, they
That's
might
what-
stink this weekend offensively.
Oof.
I would say there's more of a chance for that than defensively, believe it or not, because Cleveland's still got a bunch of good players on defense.
Well, in this field,
They
you know,
do.
you
They got a
got
pretty good
when I
defense.
talked to you about this, John, yesterday, you know, all of a sudden Jim Schwartz blitzes more than anybody
Yeah.
in the league. They are third blitz rate in the league. They blitz 39% of the time. You got Myles Garrett. You know, you got a defense over there that took them to the playoffs last year. What has happened to that defense
and Joe
this
Flacco.
year?
And
Yeah,
Joe.
and you know, the overcorrection stuff. Like, oh my God, their offense has been so bad. Everybody bets against them, and then this is the week they bounce back and have a competent, you know, refocus of simplifying things. We'll see. I don't know. Their offense has been bad pretty much the whole season, but their defense is pretty solid.
That the Philadelphia trust in Kellen Moore is wild. Now that Devin White is gone, I'm going to start focusing on that. That is wild. This guy's put together, and I guess it comes down to people don't think he's putting together the game plans. He's putting together the game plans. And they've run 13 plays this year to open games and gotten 12 yards. And hey, fire the coach and put Kellen Moore in there. He'll fix it. Boy, Jalen Hurts has regressed.
My favorite my thought that it goes through my head all the time with the fan base for all the sports in this town. Let's fire the coach or the manager so I can complain about the next one.
That's true.
I mean, it's essentially it. We hate Brett Brown, fire him. We get Doc Rivers. Yes, this guy won a championship. He sucks. Get rid of him.
Yep.
You know, you get Joe Girardi. He won a World Series. He sucks. Get rid of him. Now this guy sucks. Kapler sucked. They all sucked.
Well, think about the
So I can
coordinators.
complain about the next one. At what point does it finally?
The only guys who leave, you know, Frank Reich, who, by the way, Jeffrey Lurie and Howie Roseman wanted to fire after the 2016 season, and Doug talked him out of it. Then they won the Super Bowl. So Frank gets to leave on his own terms. And Shane got to leave on his own terms. Everybody else, they hate, as you pointed out, the Mike Rose of the world, the Press Taylors, the Rich Scangarellas.
It's
they
the
hate.
age-old thing because they know they can't play the game, but they deep down believe they could do that job if they had the opportunity to do it. If they put in the time, the blood, the sweat, the tears, the time of wait, they believe they could do that job better than the guys there. So they always say the coach is the problem because I could do a better job. You can't blame the player because you know you can't do a better job. And every coach, get rid of him. He stinks. And then you complain about the next one. At what point do you finally come to terms with that's not the issues all the time? Do this have a role? It has a role, but it's not why your team is not where you want it to be all the time. You don't have the talent. The Phillies, their lineup is not good enough. It's not Rob Thompson, this, that, and the other. They don't hit. They don't have you're hitting Bryson Stott in the 5-hole one day, and the next day he's not even good enough to be in your lineup. You're not good enough.
But Mike, here's the problem with that, because if you're the owner and you're looking at it, you're like, all right, you're right. All right, so now who's to blame? You paid Jalen Hurts $52 million. Is he not good enough? Is that part of the problem? Now you're getting into way bigger wormholes where it's like, well, I could fire Nick pretty easily. I can't fire Jalen Hurts.
Quarterback pay, Zander, is a tough one because these teams get back into a corner where they don't have really options. There's only so many guys that can play that position. And when you have a guy that shows competency that could do it, he did it at almost the highest of high levels. He almost won the Super Bowl. And again, you can make an argument that he was the best player on the field in that Super Bowl.
Yeah, no,
and
he
when
was.
But
if it's the Jimmys and Joes, Mike, then who's the next guy you got to blame? It's Howie. That's why I started the show on defense. It's Howie. Every dart he threw this year on defense was a miss. I joked it was a butter knife. He's not throwing darts anymore. He's throwing butter knives.
I think the roster construction, we go to the Phillies. I say Dave Dombrowski, for 3 years, this team has failed because their offense is too inconsistent. And he never went out and got another bat. He kept the same offense 2022, 2023, 2024. It's the same guys. That's a roster construction. So, yeah, you want to talk about the roster construction that they don't have the right talent right now. I don't think you can argue that. Now, are you going to get it every year? The problem is, like, for the organizations, it's a building block. It's a process. They want consistent, good seasons, great seasons. And you figure if we're consistently good, one of those years we will do the ultimate. But the fans want to be the best team every year. They don't look at it like they understand we can't win every year, but we have to build towards something. They look long-term. We look.
And by the way, that's the right way to do it. That's the way Andy Reid did it. That was his whole philosophy.
But that's the disconnect between why fans overreact and get irrational is we live in the moment. They live big picture. And when you have a big picture thinker and an in the moment thinker, they're going to clash. And you're going to have people who don't like the results of, we all have the text group. You're watching a play and your buddy says, "What the F is this?" And you're like, dude, it's 3rd down and 3 in the second quarter of the game. Relax. But people can't. They live in that moment right there. Whereas that play for Kellen Moore, and you hope anyway, if he's doing his job, maybe that play didn't work up, but it's setting up a play that I can use in the 4th quarter. I show that formation. They see this, and then I have something I can run off of it. If he's a really good coordinator, he's using plays that might not work to set up something later. But we can't fans can't wrap their heads around that aspect of the big picture. And that's where the disconnect collides of this coach sucks, because generally they're thinking big picture and fans are thinking this play right here. Every play has to be a touchdown. And if it's not, you fail. And that's not the way they think.
And by the way, the Phillies have it worse than even the Eagles, because this is a football city, football mentality, and they treat baseball games like they treat football games, which are, in the regular season, that's fine. In the playoffs, when you play 162, sometimes you want to save somebody's arm, and you don't care if you lose 14-3, if you're getting blown out. And say, you know what? I'm not going to waste anybody out. And they're like, why is this pitcher out there? Why is this? You got to think about things from a long-term perspective. That's Howie's job.
And there's a fine line too of how much did you take your foot off the gas and not keep competitive games? I mean, and we talk about this with the Phillies were the wild card team. They kept playing high-intensity baseball. When you're playing high-intensity baseball every day, that's a different brand of baseball. And the Mets look like a team that's had some juice pushing on them for 3 weeks. And the Phillies just kind of looked like they were out playing golf, smoking stogies with their feet up. And now you're getting into high-intensity pressure cookers. Not great. Not great.
Yeah. Yeah, hopefully the Phillies extend the series, because Philadelphia needs something, because these people need something. At Mike Gill Show, make sure you listen to Mike down the shore if you're local in the South Jersey area, 2 to 6, the Sports Bash. Thanks, Mike. We kept you late, but you're always great. That's why we keep you late.
Mike, appreciate it, man. Great stuff today.
All right, everybody. We'll see you.
Thanks, bud.
Johnny Mac, before we get to our break, we got BLG coming up in 9 minutes. Appreciate everybody being here today. Got a great crowd in here this morning. Appreciate all of you guys. The latest news in Eagle Land, Devin White was released yesterday. We broke that down really all in hour number 1 there with Mike Gill. John, here's the one pushback, because I do agree with you guys on the coaches. It's always easy to scapegoat coaches. But here's the one thing, and I'd like to get your response to this. Doesn't some of it have to go on the coaches eventually, though? And here's what I mean. And you've talked about this with Kellen Moore. You're down A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, and Lane Johnson. You come out and throw the ball 9 times. That's bad coaching. You come in versus defense versus Baker Mayfield. Every cornerback is 10, 12 yards off the receiver. We had Eric Allen on This Week in Pro Football last Thursday on JAKIB Sports, Eric Allen. He's like, yeah, I don't really get that philosophy on defense. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Like, that's coaching, right? Now, if the players don't perform, I get it. That's the players. But the coaches can still be better. No?
Well, sure. I mean, and you can have it both ways. You'll hear the coaches constantly say, I got to do a better job because they want to protect the players. And I think too many people take that seriously. Um, in the case of the coaches, Vic, because, I believe Vic, and I believe Vic because he's a history of being honest. And he said, I was telling them to play tighter, and they didn't play tighter. So, where's that sort of demarcation line? They're not out there.
Right.
And that's why, can they be better? Of course. I mean, you got to be better scripting games to start. That's what you spend most of your time on. That's when you should be your sharpest, to be honest. And the Eagles have been the worst team in football. And my point to that is everybody wants to elevate that guy to be the head coach. They convince themselves, ties themselves into well, that's Nick Sirianni. All right. Is it? You're so sure about that? You're 100% sure about that? Because I can tell you 100% it's not Nick Sirianni. The guy scripting the plays is 13 yards in 12 plays, or I think 12 yards in 13 plays, one or the other. The only team in the NFL that hasn't scored in the first quarter. Only team in the NFL.
Well,
this guy ain't Bill Walsh.
Will they break that streak on Sunday?
Will they score in the first quarter? Yes. Right. Will they score on the first drive? Probably not. I mean, and most of it again is they've gotten, if you look at each game, all 4 games, they've gotten behind the sticks on the first drive. Be a penalty, fumble, what have you. They've gotten behind the sticks in all 4 of the drives. And all Kellen Moore's talked about since he got here, while everybody else is talking about the motion, clean operation, clean operation, clean operation. And this is guy everybody wants to elevate to be the head coach. If they do fire Nick Sirianni, I'm going with Vic Fangio to be the head coach. I'll tell you that right now.
Well, here's why I said Kellen, because 1, they like offensive minds, and 2, they interviewed Kellen a couple years ago when Nick got the job. That's why I was like, maybe they would.
And I'm not saying the organization will do that, because you're right.
Right. You're saying you'd go with Vic.
Yes, I'm saying I would go with Vic Fangio, and it's not close, to be honest. At least he commands a room. Yeah, but I think it's amazing the assumption that, look, the vast majority, and I guarantee you, Jets fans are like, fire Robert Saleh, fire Rob, and it's not just Eagles fans, and they're never thinking about who's next, who they want, who's going to be better. The Eagles don't have a better option than Nick Sirianni right now.
Yeah, well, the problem is, I mean, like, I looked at the Robert Saleh thing, and I get it. It's easy to call for the coach. Robert Saleh had Zach Wilson as his starting quarterback for 90% of the games he was the head coach. He had Mike White. He had Joe Flacco.
Yeah, 6 different quarterbacks.
And Aaron Rodgers played like 6 of them.
And they have a good defense.
Their defense is top 3 in the league right now in everything. I mean, their defense is playing lights out.
Nobody can cover Justin Jefferson, and they covered Justin Jefferson.
But don't you think that brings like a bigger thing on Nick? Like we talked about Dan Campbell and Detroit, and I'm like, well, it's a good point, but Dan Campbell did it in Detroit. They've stunk for years. Nick Sirianni, in a way, did inherit a pretty damn good football team.
He inherited
the best team out of all the coaches that year.
He knows he's lucky with the offensive line he inherited. He knows. He talks about it all the time. Typically, when you're a head coach, you're taking over a bad situation. And generally that starts up front, either side of the football. And he inherited a very good offensive line. and a very good defensive line, which is unfortunately started to trend in a negative direction. And that's rare for a first year head coach because they're usually coming into bad situations. So yeah, Nick came into the best situation of that group, and but on the other hand, he's been the most successful overall of that group. So it's a bottom line business. You're right to add that context. He probably shits the bed with the Jets, and maybe he's worse than even Robert Saleh. But that's the reality of
We
the
call
NFL.
Robert Saleh to help us with Bryce Huff, John. Hey, Robert, what'd you do with this guy that made it work? Because we can't get shit out of him.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Hey, everybody in New York thinks he can play,
including Robert. So maybe call him up. Let's get to a couple supers. I want to get out of here. So because we got BLG coming up in about 3 minutes. So I want to get to our commercial break. Caleb Brandon checks in. We got 2 from Caleb. Caleb, big shout out to you, brother. Thank you for being here. He says, we don't run the best running back league in the league on first down. I don't care how many coaching changes we had. Blaming players for this horrendous play calling, I just don't get it. That's where, I mean, look, there's both deserve blame, John. I agree with you that you can't put it all on players, but there is some things that this coaching staff is doing. It almost defies common sense. You don't have AJ and Devontae, and you come out and you start slinging the ball around the yard. It's like, what? Run the ball with Saquon. He's right there. I don't, that's what drives me crazy. So, but
well, I don't. Saquon, generally has not been effective early in games. I mean, if you look at Tampa, first play, he flushes right. Everybody loses their mind because Saquon gets open late in the process, and that shitty throw, whatever Jalen was trying to do.
Yeah.
Then the 2nd and 10, they run it to Saquon, no gain. 3rd and 10 was a short pass to Dallas Goedert, and Dallas made 7 yards. And then they're in punt formation. Then they get backed up with a false start, and they punt the football. That was the first drive. If you go back to Green Bay, the first one, the first play was a pitch to Saquon Barkley. Shitty field. He slips. They lose 5 yards. They're behind the sticks. I think a lot of this is they tried to get the ball to Saquon Barkley early in games. It's been ineffective for various reasons. And then later he pops off and has some good runs and home run. And I think that inflates that, not getting yardage early.
Yeah, I get it. Caleb checks in again. If they fire Nick, I don't want nobody in that building. Call Bill or Doug P. I'm tired of the passing on first and bend but don't break. Need a vet coach. Caleb expressing some frustration. Caleb, I'm with you, brother. I agree. I see what you're saying for sure. Brian Fleming checks in, John. He said, Brian, appreciate it, man. He says, so who's this year's Robert Quinn or Shaq Leonard that takes our other 3rd round pick? The desperation trash pick Band-Aid from Howie Napoleon. Ego is bruised. Brian coming in swinging, John.
I had to take Jody off the bridge with Shaq Leonard. Oh, they got to get Shaq Leonard. They got to get Shaq Leonard. The Cowboys are looking at Shaq Leonard. That was the key to it all.
Yeah.
You're not going to get anything of relevance at the trade deadline. There's a couple ones, Devontae Adams. It usually has to do with a player that's unhappy in his situation. You're not getting Max Crosby. The NFL's not, even though it's gotten a little bit better and you have younger GMs more willing to make moves, there's no big sell-offs. There's no NBA or Major League Baseball mentality. I mean, you're as far as talent, your lot is cast for the most part. Can you add a contributor? Yeah, you hopefully. Back in the day, Jannard Avery, Golden Tate won you a playoff game. Whatever Howie's done at the trade deadline. Hopefully they're a little bit better than Robert Quinn, who was washed. But you're not getting an all-pro at the trade deadline.
No,
unless it's
threw a lot of darts this week, John. And
what's that?
Howie did throw a lot of darts this offseason on defense, and it doesn't look like any of them have worked out. to this point. But we will see how it plays out. Let's get to our commercial break. We got BLG in the green room. I can't wait to talk to BLG. He might have to talk me off the ledge. Mike Gill didn't, John. I gave him the thing, and he's like, oh, no, you're not overreacting at all. You're spot on. I'm like, oh, great. Thanks, Mike. So let me get to the commercial break. I'll talk to BLG. Before I do that, let me tell you all about BetUS, our great partner here on Birds 365. Check out that promo, everybody. Using that code YouTube150, you get 150% sign-up bonus on your very first deposit up to $2,000. And then on your second and third deposit, you get up to 125%. So deposit less and bet with more. I'm taking the Birds over the Browns this week, but I don't feel too confident.
Sound like it.
I still got to do it, John. They're the Browns. They stink right now. So we'll see. Go to betus.com.pa, everybody. That's betus.com.pa. They have the fastest payouts in the industry, 24/7 customer support, and they'll even give you a custom account manager to take care of you. So go check out betus.com today and use that promo code. Back in 3 minutes, everybody, with BLG.
If you missed any of today's show on the JAKIB Media channel, listen to the podcast on your way home. Available on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify.